My name is Sergio Morales, and welcome back to our Photovoice video series. So this specific video will be quite short, but we will be talking about additional things to consider when planning a Photovoice project. So before getting into that video, I highly recommend watching our very first video where we introduce what Photovoice is. So that way you have a little bit more of context into what Photovoice is and what this Photovoice video series is about. So the link to that video will be in the description below. So make sure to check that out first. So now moving on to the actual video, I will be talking about logistical considerations when planning a Photovoice project. And the very first thing I want to talk about is the use of phones in digital cameras. So usually in a Photovoice project, you will provide people with digital cameras so that they could use to take pictures of their very own community. But you also have the option where you can let people use their very own cell phones instead to take pictures of their communities. And if you are deciding which route to take, something important to consider is the group or the demographic of people that are going to be your participants and who you are going to be working with. So let's say if you're going to be working with younger people, then it will make sense to let people use their very own cell phones, because generally younger people tend to use cell phones a lot more. But let's say you're working with a group of people who might not have access to cell phones, or a group of people who might not use cell phones as much, then it will make sense for you to provide them with digital cameras to use. So that is something important to consider. And then on top of that, there's also a third option, which is the use of professional cameras. So you could also use professional cameras for a Photovoice project. But of course, if you do this route, then you will also have to provide training on how to use those cameras. And this training would usually occur in the very first phase of the Photovoice process. And as I mentioned before, the very first phase of the Photovoice process is the workshop phase. So here you have workshops where you introduce people to what Photovoice is and the topic of your project. But now, in addition to that, you will also give training to people on how to use professional cameras. So that is the very first bullet point that I wanted to talk about. So now moving on to the second bullet point, it is the project facilitators. And with this specific topic, it is ideal for project facilitators to be from the local community or have a very strong connection to the community, because in every type of community engagement work, trust is very important, and having that relationship of trust already built coming into a community engagement project, it is very important to have that when it comes to these types of collaborations. So because of that, and because trust is very important, it is ideal for project facilitators to have some form of connection to the community that you are working with. And then on top of that, it is ideal to also for them to have some sort of experience with Photovoice, whether that is like knowledge in Photovoice, or whether that is experience facilitating a Photovoice project. So that's also important too. And the video description below will also have more resources about how to facilitate a Photovoice project that goes beyond this Photovoice video series. So if you would like more details into that and you would like to learn much more, then check out the resources in our video description. And then we have our third bullet point, which is the participant size in a project. So usually there are 10 to 25 participants in a Photovoice project, but in a lot that has to do with the fact that, as I mentioned before, Photovoice, a lot of it is about community building community while doing research. And that is why usually the participant size is on the smaller side. But let's say you have a group of people of 50, and you have 50 participants in a project, that's quite a larger number of people. Then something that you could do is break that group of 50 people into two groups of 25 people. So you have two groups, two smaller groups, and then those groups where people can build their own community. And that is something else to consider when it comes to participant size. So that is the third bullet point. And now moving on to the fourth bullet point, that is the venue. And as I mentioned before in the previous video, one big part of the Photovoice process is the venue, which is an at-large discussion with the greater community and local leaders about what the Photovoice project was about and the findings of that research project. So it is very important. It is also ideal that the venue is in person. It is important to have these conversations in person, but also too, there are logistical constraints to this. Sometimes it is very difficult to secure a venue. And because of that, like, you do not necessarily have to panic. You could also find other ways to act as venues. So another way that you could do for a venue is the use of social media or the use of some type of online source where you could have a venue, an online venue basically. So you do not necessarily have to be in person to create a venue or to create awareness of your Photovoice project or to spread the word for Photovoice project, but also you could do so through online means as well. Ideally, it would be ideal that the venue would be in person, but there's also the option of doing an online venue instead too, if there are logistical constraints. So that is the fourth bullet point. And now moving on to the fifth and final bullet point, and that is the project timeline. So Photovoice projects usually take a lot of preparation to facilitate, but each project will have a different timeline according to its size and needs. So in here you have a figure. This figure is from the previous introductory Photovoice video. You might remember it. And in this figure, it breaks down the Photovoice process into four main parts, I mean. It breaks down the process into four main parts. The first one is framing the issues, the workshop phase. Then that is the photo collecting phase. And then after that is the analysis phase. And then the fourth one is the venue, the reporting and celebrating phase. And to give an example more of what I'm going to talk about, we're going to be talking about the very first workshop phase. So in that workshop phase, you will also have to plan the workshops, like who is going to lead the workshops, what are you going to be talking about, how many workshops are you going to do. So in that planning process of the workshops, that takes a lot of time and effort to do so. But besides that, you also have facilitating the workshops. So maybe you might do the workshops. Maybe you have 4 workshops and each workshop is every day. So you have 4 workshops back to back. But let's say that might be a lot to people or a lot to the participants. You might want to give them more time. That instead of like 4 days back to back, you could do the workshops in a span of 1, 2, or 3 weeks. But again, that depends to the number of people in your project. That also depends on your timeline, your specific logistical constraints when it comes to time, and also to the budget. That's something else to consider, the budget as well. So yeah, for framing the issue specifically, you have to consider like planning the workshops, the time it will take to do that, and then also how long it will take to facilitate those workshops. And again, it depends on the size and needs of your project. So that is very specific to the very first phase. And you will also have to do the same thing for the second phase, the third phase, and the fourth phase. And then for the fourth phase specifically, you also have to do the process when it comes to securing a venue and then also planning the event. So that's like some examples into what I mean. But most importantly, what I wanted to emphasize in this slide is that there's not really a general timeline template on how to do a Photovoice project. And again, as I mentioned before, a lot of it has to do that each Photovoice project will have a different timeline according to its size and needs. So that's why there's not really like a template on how to do a project timeline wise. So yeah, that is what I wanted to emphasize with this specific slide and this specific bullet point. And now this concludes our video for today. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for tuning in to our Photovoice video series. The description below here, you will see that there are also other videos in our Photovoice video series. So make sure to check that out so you could learn much more about Photovoice and other parts, such as the show method, how to take better pictures, and also a case study of a Photovoice project. So you would like to learn more in terms of that, then check those out, and the links will be in the description below. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and I hope I can see you all in the next video. Thank you.